Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Roney, and in this course, Business 671, we're going to talk about implementation of strategy. And one of the devices that will be used to share knowledge about strategy implementation with you is to actually go through the process of preparing or implementing the strategic planning process itself. Through this process and this project, the intent is to give you a good understanding of what is involved in corporate level strategic planning. And for some of you who go on to obtain employment in corporations, this knowledge will be invaluable because many folks who come from business curricula haven't had any training in strategic planning or business planning. And when they get to their new employment locations, folks can get confused because there's quite a bit involved in strategic planning, and they haven't been confronted with all of those topics. So the purpose of this video is to share with you what will be involved in that project that you and your teammates will be conducting during weeks 4 through 7 of this course. However, beginning right away, you and your teammates can begin to assemble information that will be required to complete the project. And so after this project, after this review, and this video has been reviewed by you, seen by you, you and your teammates ought to be able to get started right away in assembling the information that's required. And you already have the skill to do quite a lot of that work because you learned those skills in Business 670, which was about the theory of strategic management. But much of that course, although theoretic, was addressed to the methodology of strategic management and strategic planning. So you should, by this time, have a pretty good understanding of the theory, just what's involved in strategic planning. In this course, for the first 3 weeks, you'll be studying a little bit more about the actual implementation and enactment and conduct of strategic planning and strategic management functions. And then you will have had a complete course in strategic management. And again, the purpose of forming this course has been to give you skills that you will be able to use when you get into corporate management. Now, some of you may not have that desire. You may not want to join a company, which makes me wonder why you're taking a course in business administration, but that's between you and whoever you talk with to make those decisions. But this course is really intended to propel those of you who are headed into corporate management into a favorable position and to be better off than other people who enter corporations initially, better off than them, than others, to do well in your career and in your management responsibilities, so that you can move ahead, that you can move faster than others and have a more successful career. These two courses, Business 670 and 671, were designed with that objective in mind. So with that, I'd like to get started now in just running through some PowerPoint slides and chatting about the methods of assembling a strategic plan, and more importantly, the work that you and your teammates will have to do to complete this project, which is a scaled down illustration of the strategic planning process. So here we go. I hope here we go. I always wonder when I'm using PowerPoints in Zoom meetings, but there it is. Okay. Here we go. Structure of a strategic planning project. Your strategic planning project. Incidentally, I begin with a little reminder, and that is that if you are preparing a strategic plan in business, in a regular business, you almost always, when all your work is done, need to prepare an executive summary. And that's because there may be several people in the corporation at a high level or other levels who need to know that this plan of yours or the plan that you have contributed to exists, and they need to know generally what the intention of that plan is, what its goals, strategic objectives, primary projects and implementation methods might be. But they may not have the time or the motivation to get into the detail. So an executive summary makes it possible for you to communicate the highlights and the essential conclusions of your work to people who need to know or are interested and can benefit from that knowledge, and perhaps gain a little bit of respect for you because you've put together all the pieces of this puzzle, this issue regarding entering a new business, or perhaps just updating the strategic intent of the business that already exists. But an executive summary goes a long way. Sometimes companies forget that, but if you know it, again, this gives you a little extra skill, makes your product a little more marketable, if you will. Okay, so we're going to go through the topics in the strategic assessment or strategic plan that you and your teammates are going to prepare to complete the requirements of this course. And you will recognize almost all of the terms that I use because you've already dealt with them in Business 670 and theoretically passed quizzes and tests about these items. But there will be an occasional added item or additional perspective that I'll provide for you. And the first one is at the very top of this list. Now, the history of the company certainly should not be a surprise. We need, and I'm sure that in the very first part of our work in 670, I mentioned that the background needs to have a history, a summary of the products and services, and a discussion of mission. But you can see under history, I've added a phrase, administrative heritage. I didn't put a closing quotation. I'll do that now. But the path through history that this company has taken and the highlights, the key items, the turning points on that path are what we're looking for. Administrative heritage is a phrase that I did not make up. It was coined by a couple authors who contributed quite a lot to the strategic management literature, but they talk about an administrative heritage or that path that the company travels through over time, and from time to time reaches a particular juncture where the company could go one direction or another, or there's a key change, very often in the chief executive. Maybe there's a major merger or acquisition that adds to the company's scope and changes its dimensions substantially. For instance, that's what happened when Pepsi-Cola merged with Frito-Lay to form the company PepsiCo. It really changed the character of that company. That was a turning point. And it's part of PepsiCo's administrative heritage. It's sort of a summary of the company's DNA over time. How did that company become what it is today? What contributed to that? That's the administrative heritage. What makes it difficult to prepare an administrative heritage is that it shouldn't be long. What you're looking for are those key points, those key events in the company's history that made a major difference in the future of that company and what it's capable of doing, or perhaps not capable of doing. Okay. We've certainly don't have to talk much about products and services. I'm sure that for the company you've chosen, you can summarize that real well. Usually companies' websites have fantastic artwork that you can pick up and put into your PowerPoints, and they really make your presentation look classy. The mission, we're talking about Abel's model here, aren't we? And you've certainly, you should be familiar with that. So we're just summarizing what market or population segment this company serves. Sometimes it's easier to describe that than in others, because the market is so large and the population may be worldwide, but you can put that into words, and that's what you need to do. What are the unmet needs? Now this says the needs of the segment to be met. Pardon me, I'm getting over a little bit of a chest cold, so I may cough now and then, and I'm sorry for that. But what are the unmet needs in particular in this market or market segment that the firm can meet, or perhaps will have to meet in order to be successful? And then finally, what competences, generally, what kind of competences will be required to meet those needs? We'll get into the specific competences and capabilities later on in the outline, but generally, are we talking about research and development, such as in a drug or pharmaceutical company? for a chemical company where we have to do lots of research and development? Are we talking about marketing? Are we talking about engineering and low-cost production for efficiencies and so forth, in order to meet those needs? Now, later on in this Moodle shell, you will find a little video which is entitled something like Abel's Framework Explained, something like that. An adjunct instructor taught this course last year. When he did that, he inserted this mini video. It's not very long, and frankly, it's pretty good, except that where I have placed competences, he has inserted the word technology. And lately, you will see the word technology instead of competences. I think that it is better to stay with the term competences. When Abel drafted this model, there wasn't the technology, the information technology, the internet, artificial intelligence, all the technology that we have today. But that actually works out pretty well because there's more to competence than just technology. And so Abel used that term, competences, to refer not just to the technological abilities of a company, but its methodological capabilities in marketing, finance, banking, international relationships and international operations, manufacturing, and so forth. So there's so much more to competence than just information technology. So when you see that little video, remember this remark that I just made. Competence is the term that Abel used originally, and it's still the best one. All right, so this takes us then to the environmental assessment. You can see my comment right at the top. Select the relevant items for your case. What we begin with here are a couple of questions to help you focus on what kind of economic and marketing information you'll be gathering and looking for. So if your company is in consumer products or services, that it tends to encourage collection of information, economic information that is relevant to consumers. Inflation rates these days are a pretty important item in that regard. Industrial, if your company is an industrial corporation, then there will be a lot of other variables to collect that you might not collect in the consumer sector. In the industrial sector, the industrial production level, the availability and costs of labor might be an illustration. Some companies are involved in both consumer and industrial products. And then, of course, they have a lot more information to collect about both consumer and industrial economies. But this is not, I've actually had people prepare their presentations with these questions in the presentation. Don't do that. These items are meant to help you focus your thought process on what kind of information you'll be gathering. So does the company generate significant revenue outside the United States? And I believe that that will be the case in all of the companies that you study. So we're going to need to gather information about the economies of multiple countries. Now, in the case of PepsiCo, again, I think PepsiCo does business in 70 some countries. And by now it's probably more than that. For your information, early in my career, I was on the internal consulting staff of the holding corporation, the parent company of PepsiCo, and helped to provide, and I was a staff person back then, but I was one of the folks in a department that provided technical assistance on management issues to all the companies in PepsiCo. And those companies were being added at a pretty rapid rate. PepsiCo was growing at that time, and I came into the company not too long after the merger of PepsiCo and Frito-Lay. So it's a lot different today than it was back then. But even then, PepsiCo wanted to upgrade the quality of management in its divisions, and it had this department to provide technical assistance, and I was in that department. Okay, so I think another company that we're studying is Pfizer, and then I'm trying to remember which automotive company. It might be Ford. Ford, of course, Pfizer is in a great many countries rather, and Ford is all over the world and is making a real strong attempt to improve its position in China, which is the world's largest market for cars. More cars are produced and purchased in China than in the United States or any other country. So if you're in the auto industry and you're not playing ball in China, you're not in the major leagues. Okay, so given those answers to questions 1 and 2, what indicators might you gather? And some examples are just down there in item 3. Again, those are not my statement of your requirements, although most of those items will be included in your project. The GDP, the growth rate of GDP for the US and the other major countries. I got off track a minute ago when I talked about PepsiCo. Because PepsiCo's in 70 some odd countries, you don't have to, and you wouldn't be able to gather economic information about all 70 of those countries. What we want to do is try to pick information from the largest countries where PepsiCo or the company that you're dealing with does business. And usually those countries will include the US and China. When we talk about the International Monetary Fund database, the IMF database actually has an item or a unit for the European Union, as well as the Euro countries, the 17 countries that use the Euro as their common currency. So you can draw information about individual European countries, or you can draw information about the entirety of the European Union or the 17 countries that use the Euro. the so-called Eurozone. And we can get a little more information about the Eurozone than the entire EU because those countries have more in common. So GDP per capita, good measure of the national wealth, interest rates, inflation rates, levels of capital investment, employment rates and levels. Those are the sorts of things you probably already were thinking of. So if we want to break it down again between the consumer and industrial sectors, what sort of variables would we be looking for in the consumer economy? Clearly, the unemployment rate. Another thing, frankly, is the employment level. How many people are employed in that country? Because the number of people who are employed is the number of people who get some kind of income with which to purchase goods and services. So employment levels make a good item to measure. The price trends for items that are not discretionary. So there are some items that we have to purchase before we can buy other things because we like them. So today, the purchase of gasoline is non-discretionary if you have to drive to work or drive your kids to school, right? And so as the price of that item goes up, you have less left over in your family's budget to buy things that are discretionary. These are non-discretionary. What are some other non-discretionary items? They would be food, healthcare, transportation, shelter. So if you're renting as opposed to owning a home, and even then the cost of owning a home and the occupancy, those costs are all going up in this country lately, and they are in Europe as well. And so as those trends continue, the ability of people to buy discretionary goods, items that they purchase not because they have to, but just because they want to, the ability of people to buy discretionary goods goes down when the cost of non-discretionary goods goes up. So if you're looking at a consumer product company, I would think that those trends today would be especially important in your analysis. The saving rate is another interesting item. It's the portion of disposable personal income, and disposable personal income is essentially the wages and salaries less income taxes. So then the portion of that is not spent is the saving rate. And today you can imagine that that rate isn't as high as it used to be because of what we were just talking about. So, but the saving rate can be an indication of more than one item or more than one dynamic. First of all, if the saving rate goes up, as it did a few years ago, it represented people's caution, the reluctance to take a risk because folks were uncertain about the economic outlook, and they wanted to save money because they thought, among other things, that they might not be employed. On the other hand, saving rates during really good times often also go down, but that's because people are very confident about their employment, about the economy. Times are good. Why save? Let's spend. So it's good to look at these trends Today, I suspect the saving rate is going down because the cost of non-discretionary goods is going up and people don't want to do without the goods and services that are discretionary, but they just don't want to do without. And so finally, how do we reconcile a declining saving rate with increasing spending? And you can see it in item D, and that's consumer debt. And it can either be the installment debt that is used to buy a home or a car, or revolving debt, like in your credit card that we use to make daily purchases and make payments monthly and keep on spending. Anyway, all of these are indications of what's going on in the consumer economy. And there are others besides those, but I think that these are a good illustration of the sort of variables that you should be looking for. And we have excellent sources of data for these variables here in the United States. The Federal Reserve is one of those. There's a website called FRED, all capitals, FRED, Federal Reserve Economic Database. And from that database, you can get excellent time series trends of these and several other variables, as well as forecasts for 5 years. So the Federal Reserve just gives us a great resource there. And there are several other sources like that one. I've already mentioned the International Monetary Fund database for just about every country in the world. Maybe not with all these variables, but they include other variables that we haven't mentioned yet. So definitely have a look at those two sources if you haven't before. That takes us to industrial economic indicators. Industrial production index obviously is a key. We know what happened to industrial production during the pandemic, and in several industries, industrial production and the production of that industry has recovered. So in addition to the industrial production index, when we get around to looking at a specific industry, which we will do in just a minute, we'll want to look, if we're looking at cars, at the production of automobiles in the world, as well as different countries. Capacity utilization is a measure that is actually computed, again, by the Federal Reserve. So we can take a look at what portion of the nation's capacity is being utilized. If it's high and rising, that means we're probably going to have capital expenditures go up. On the other hand, if it's declining, that would indicate that capital expenditures will not be going up, though they will probably subside. Corporate profits are obviously important for industrial economic indicators, and interest rates of more than one category. There are short-term interest rates that are used for financing of working capital, inventory and receivables. On the other hand, long-term interest rates are used to finance the purchase of machinery, equipment, and even new manufacturing facilities. So if your industry, your company is an industry that does a lot of capital spending, then longer term interest rates will be a relevant indicator that you will want to collect. The good news is that although these interest rates vary from country to country, they all tend to move pretty much in tandem with the same pattern. So when you get one, you get a pretty good indication of what's happening elsewhere. Although the differences between some countries, such as the US and China and Russia, and the Eurozone, it may be helpful to plot, just gather the rates from more than one source and plot them on the same graph. It'd be very interesting to see how countries differ. Okay, so let me just stop here a minute. What we've talked about so far, the background and mission, and the economics, and now markets are all going to be the subjects of information to be gathered in the first week of your team's project, which is week number 4 of this course. So do you have to wait for week number 4 to gather the economic information that we've just been talking about? I don't think so. I think you could start right now. Your challenge, of course, is going to be to divide this work among your team members so that the work can be done. Because if you just were to ask one person to do it, it would be too much. You're going to have to look this information over, or these requirements over, and then just decide who's going to do what. So when we're looking at markets, again, we can look at consumer markets or industrial markets. If we're looking at consumer markets, what's a market? It's the source of demand, right? It's the community of buyers. And so how would we describe trends in your market? If you're talking about consumer products industries, consumer products companies, you're obviously interested in population trends, demographics, particularly age group population trends. As it turns out, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola have ended up appealing to different age groups. It wasn't intended to be that way. And when I meet with the PepsiCo team, I'll explain that. But the population of age groups certainly makes a big difference. When we're talking about pharmaceuticals, pharmaceuticals are purchased for very young people, infants, because they need so much care when they're just little tots. And then we wait until perhaps people start to get into their 40s or 50s, and boy, the number of prescriptions, the amount of purchases of drugs and pharmaceuticals goes up drastically as people get older, past the age of about 45. And somewhere I have a graph that demonstrates this. You may find a more recent one, but it's really dramatic. It goes up with it. It's a little high for infants and mothers, you know. It comes down, and then as we get older, up it goes in a big way. So that's and that tells us about not only what drugs we want to produce, but how to market them. So the migration of populations geographically can be a major item as well. There's a major pattern of migration in the United States, for instance, from the north and east to the south and the west. Consumer buying intentions. We all have to have a portable computer today because many of us are working at home rather than in the office because of the pandemic. And many people and employers have found that they like that because if you're an employer, you don't have to pay for as much office space. So there are various reasons, but there does seem to be a trend in that direction. And then various taste trends and flavor and preferences for styles and so forth. And of course, the last item, health and safety concerns, are growing ever more important. Now, if we're talking about industrial products, then the production of the either that industry or the industries that consume those products, their production, revenue, and profit trends. In this case, if we're talking about cars, it's pretty obvious. It's the auto industry's production revenue and profit trends, but we want to look at the differences between countries and regions. If we're talking, I think the other company that's just occurred to me is John Deere. And of course, boy, you know, what would we be looking at here? We'd be looking not just at the production and revenue of agricultural and construction equipment manufacturers, but we'd also be looking at agricultural markets themselves, agricultural production. And Deere makes highway construction equipment too, so we might even be looking at the highway construction trends. And of course, we've got this proposal in Congress to add to the infrastructure to improve highways and bridges. And that looks like good news for Caterpillar and John Deere. So you can just be sure that that's something that the Deere team is going to need to take a look at. Interest rates are going to be important too, because the financing for customers like contractors or farmers to buy a big tractor will be for perhaps 10 years. But the financing for to get the farmer through the growing season will be for 1 year. And depending on the industry, automobile manufacturers do a lot of midterm financing with 5-year trends and so forth. So as I speak with you, and I would like to speak with you and your team every week, we can talk about exactly what types of interest rates would be of most interest. Although once again, some of you are already going to know and be able to just go right ahead and get this data. And again, it's readily available from the Federal Reserve. The World Bank would be another source. And I'm pretty sure it's in the International Monetary Fund also. So regulation trends clearly influence the demand for products, industrial products. Raw material price levels, if we're talking about Deere Deere or Ford. What's the big item that would probably be influencing their costs today? It's the price of steel, which has gone up dramatically. And of course, electric power. So we need to see what the what the trends in these companies' costs have been. And then to the extent that it's relevant, there are some categories of industrial products that tend to be in greater demand than others. For instance, in the automotive industry, we see a lot more SUVs sold than we see sedans sold. When I was your age, there wasn't an SUV. Everything that was sold was a sedan. So times changed. Again, this plus the economic trends, and these are all just statistical trends. You get them from databases, put them into Excel spreadsheets, and graph them. So your challenge is to decide who's going to get which of these things, right? The economy indicators, the market indicators, and so forth. Who's going to get all that stuff and put it into graphs? This takes us then to what we'll be talking about in week 5. The first, what we've talked about so far, you've got time to collect between now and week 4. So I'm assuming that you can gather that information in those essentially 3 weeks. Industry structure, of course, relates to the industry that your company is in, the automotive industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the construction equipment industry, and which one? Oh, and the consumer beverage and snack food industry. Who are the competitors to these companies? And how have their financial trends been? You can make a table to show the most recent sales, operating margin, and so forth. A table would be just fine. Some folks prepare graphs to show the trends in competitors' behavior. I'll be helping you with this information and some other information that we'll see in just a minute or a few minutes. I'll send you some pages from an investment advisory service to which I subscribe. And it has the financial histories, including all those variables except leverage, which you must calculate for several years and for your company and its competitors. So pretty soon here, I'll be sending your team copies of those pages. And all you need to do is extract that information, put it on an Excel spreadsheet, and graph it. So for those of you who are get buggy-eyed when you hear about finances, this may sound scary, but it's not really. And then what do you see as the primary strengths and weaknesses of those competitors? Because strategically, you'd like to take advantage of those weaknesses, and you certainly want to form strategy to block or neutralize somehow your competitors' strengths. So we need to make some sort of a table that just summarizes those things. Okay, and then from Business 670, you surely recognize all the terms in number 2 on this slide, the BCG matrix or the GE multi-factor matrix. Each one accomplishes pretty much the same thing. The GE multi-factor matrix, life cycle matrix, and technology trends, which is you can present those graphically just in a bullet chart. 5 forces analysis to get a handle on the profit potential of the industry. The product life cycle analysis, and what we'll see in a firm like Deere is that products Some products are early in their life cycles, some are very late in their life cycles. And that'll be true in just about all of your industries. In the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, what happens when a product gets late in its life cycle? It then becomes a generic drug, right? And the prices go down. And firms that specialize in production rather than research and development are the ones that tend to take those products over. Although Pfizer has made some effort to hold on to some of those drugs because they are sold in very large quantities. And then finally, critical success factors. What are the capabilities that firms have to have in order to compete successfully? There rarely are many of those factors. When I was a consultant, we often were asked to summarize exactly what capabilities characterized firms that were winners from those that were not winners or losers. And I don't think I've ever seen an industry with 9 critical success factors, and probably not 8. Usually it turns out to be 3 or 4, and their combinations matter a lot. So if you just think about the combination, the number of combinations of 4 capabilities, types of capabilities, if you remember from high school, how do you calculate the number of combinations? It's 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, right? So 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24. So there are 24 different ways of combining 4 critical success factors. So there are 24 different clusters of competences that can make up critical success factors if there are only 4 of them. So it's not surprising that there are not many critical success factors, but you and your teammates need to decide what those critical success factors are. In pharmaceuticals, it's clearly research and development, and usually of a particular type. Well, I'll leave it there. I don't want to get into too much. I'm already going too long. But you need those because later on, we're going to evaluate competitors in terms of those critical success factors. So finally, we want to take all this information that we've gathered about the economy and the market and the industry, and we want to summarize it in some way so that we can identify the most important trends, the most important problems, the most important opportunities. And again, you've heard of a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What we're talking about here is the opportunities and threats, only they're not always threats. They're often just problems. How do we do this thing? How do we get this thing done? So SWOT, for your information, is rarely used in industry. It's frequently found in business textbooks, and it's frequently emphasized by business professors who have never been in industry, and unfortunately, they're in the majority. But I can tell you that I think I did use a SWOT analysis once early in my career. I think I did. But the more advanced I got, the busier I got, and the more management analysis capabilities emerged over the years, the rarer SWOT became. And in the last 20 years of my life as a strategic planning vice president and as a managing partner of a strategy consulting firm, I never saw a SWOT done. So you might want to just bear that in mind. What goes into a SWOT analysis is very relevant. We need to summarize the opportunities and problems. If you want to say threats, you can, but threats limits you. If you say problems, that includes threats, but it includes a lot of those unknown, I call them itches that you can't scratch. You know it's a problem, you just don't know how to approach it. And that's what successful strategic planners get paid to look at. Okay, this takes us then to capabilities analysis. Let's see, I'm trying to remember which, let's see, week 4 is environmental assessment. Week 5 is, let's see, capabilities analysis is in week 5. I'm sorry, I've got sort of a mental block here on which week things fall on now. So the capabilities analysis you've dealt with in Business 670. Financial trends include those items. Again, I will give you data from the Value Line survey reports that I get on some 2,000 companies, and they're updated every quarter. So I'll be able to give you some recent information and some trend information, as well as a forecast for these items for your company. And again, depending on how important competitors are, I'll provide you with the similar information for your firm's major competitors. Now, you should remember the critical success factor report card from Business 670. But we want to go get those critical success factors that you identified in the industry analysis, and we want to rate your company and its most important competitors, not all of them, the most important competitors, by giving them a grade. I usually use a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the equivalent of an A and a 1 is the equivalent of an F. Rate them, calculate the average for each company in order to guess which company has the most strengths or the strongest capabilities. Now, your textbook, I think, and many textbooks provide something similar to this, and they provide weightings for these various capabilities. And the weightings are decimals, which add up to 1.0. I think that's often pretty conjectural. I don't require that, but I would like to see you rate your company and its competitors based on those critical success factors. And so draw some conclusions. What are the major strengths and weaknesses of your company with regard to their functions, their resources? Again, you can see there are 4 categories of those, and the organization structure. For instance, if the company intends to become more international or to move into a particular region of the world, does the company's organization provide for that? Is the international organization large enough? Are there enough people in that organization, the international organization, and are they located where the action will be? This takes us then, we've done the environmental assessment and we've done capabilities assessment. So now it's time, and I think this is in week 6. Pardon me, I'm trying to keep my voice lubricated. But to develop goals. And for your information, in your Moodle shell, that adjunct instructor that I mentioned put a little Excel table into, I think it's week 6 of your Moodle shell. And it did a nice thing. You can just add the data that are required for the financial goals into this table, and you can get those from the data sheets that I'm going to send you with a little work, but essentially you can just load that table and you will get and it will do the calculations for you. I can see that I've got a mistake here though, and I need to fix that. You can see I made these slides several years ago. So 2021 to, I guess, 2025, it's a 5-year outlook. So there we go. And again, you will have an estimate for 2025 in those pages that I'll send you. And there's usually somebody on a team who's good with numbers and likes to do numbers. And of course, this is the stuff that that person ought to be working on. And that person also should probably get in touch with me, whether it's working on those 10-year trends or this goals table, because I don't want you to have to spend too much time on it. And then when that person gets it done, he or she should share that information with the other team members. By the way, I went over item A on this list, which is the goals hierarchy. And that is a very important item. I hope you remember the goals hierarchy. It's got 4 levels. First it's acceptable risk. The second is superior financial results. The third is a favorable market position. And the fourth is long-term growth. Where is your company on that hierarchy? And if your company is in more than one line of business, for instance, again, if we're talking about Deere, Deere is in one position when it comes to agricultural equipment, but it's in a different position when it comes to construction equipment. Deere is also in a third line of business. So depending upon the lines of business that your company is in, it may be in different positions on that hierarchy. I've got a brief mental block on Deere's third line of business, and it's driving me nuts because I know Deere's company pretty well. So it's just, it'll come to me and I'll blurt it out. In any event, we then need to summarize where the company is insofar as its competitive position is concerned. And we can do that by calculating. Usually you can just get it from statistical information in the web, but companies' market shares are usually, when they're as big as the companies that you're studying, the market shares are pretty well known and publicized. However, you can describe a company's competitive position in terms other than market share. I'm still trying to think of Deere's third business line of business is driving me nuts. but a description of market position could be the technology leader. It could be the leader among U.S. companies in China. Obviously, Tesla has leadership in electric battery-powered cars. And so, you know, what's Tesla's share of the electric car market? Well, if you can get it, that's probably interesting. But I think we can already describe Tesla's position in the automotive industry as a dominant force in electric cars. There is another company in, excuse me, in China, BYD, that professes to have larger production of electric cars than Tesla. So don't take anything for granted. So once we have the goals, you know, the funny thing about goals is, although they're probably the most important part of the plan, they take the least amount of time to write down or to put into a graph or a table. It's pretty straightforward, and yet reflect the major thinking. But it won't take you too long to summarize the goals of your company. It really does in another sense, because you've got to go do all that work to gather all that evidence that we've just been through in order to make good decisions about standards for success, goals. But now we get down to some more work. And you should recognize all these terms from Business 670. We certainly want to start out by talking about generic objectives. Least cost, not low cost. That's a mistake that textbook authors make so much. There's only one least cost competitor in an industry. Other firms may try to be low-cost competitors, but if their costs aren't as low as the least cost competitor, while those other firms are trying to get their costs low, the least cost competitor is either going to match their prices and make higher profit margins, or put its price below those that are trying to be low cost competitors. And the result will be that it will get larger market shares, and again, probably benefit from scale economy, which drives costs down further. And those companies that are trying to be low cost end up being what Porter called stuck in the middle. The alternative, of course, is to be differentiation. There are a lot more ways to be differentiated than there are to be least cost. There's only one least cost competitor, but there are several differentiated competitors based upon what they're good at. And of course, your company can have that distinction industry-wide or in a particular segment of the market. I think in all cases of the companies we're looking at, it's probably industry-wide, but we need to nail that down before we go looking at the other strategies on this list, because each of those will explain how low cost and differentiation are going to be accomplished. So I'll let you look at the other items on this list rather than read it for you and talk about every one of them. But we've already done that in Business 670. So the last item in week number 6 for you to go over are the implementation priorities. And what we're talking about there are the very most important projects and programs, the big stuff. So in Ford's case, no doubt about it, it's to get a major position in China. It's got to do that, just has to. And there are a few others that Ford has to do. It's got to get an electric car, for instance. There is a move afoot, for your information, that not a lot of people have heard about yet, but there's a move toward hydrogen cars with fuel cells. It looks like fuel cells, which are based on hydrogen, will probably find their way into trucks more than passenger cars. But a lot of work is being done to develop hydrogen power sources for cars and trucks. So those of you on the Ford team may want to take a look at hydrogen. But in any event, for Ford, for Pfizer, no doubt about it, Pfizer's got their plate full of coronavirus. But in addition, Pfizer has been a major source of pharmaceuticals for cardiac illnesses and others. So although you're going to see a lot in Pfizer about COVID, you don't want to limit yourself just to that one, and so forth. And every one of these companies, there are some major projects and programs, not the little ones, even though when you look back at your strengths and weaknesses lists, you'll see some weaknesses that you could craft a program for. And probably the company has made that program. But for purposes of this presentation, we want to just talk about the 2 or 3 or 4 at the maximum projects that are really important. What new capabilities will be required to implement this strategy? That takes us right back to Abel's model, doesn't it? What capabilities are going to be required? How will the organization change? I did a project like this one with a team that studied Federal Express several years ago. And that team wondered how long Fred Smith, the guy who started the company, would continue to be the CEO. And so it did it made some slides to show that he was a real candidate for retirement, and it did some work to demonstrate what would be required from the new CEO. And a new CEO was appointed, I think, 2 years later. And another team that worked with me did Apple, and that's when Steve Jobs was the CEO. And again, they focused in on Steve Jobs being the guiding light of that company and the strongest force. And so the question was, what would happen if Steve Jobs wasn't the CEO? And lo and behold, the next year he died. And so this team had the right idea. They focused on some critical contingencies. And I encourage you to do the same kind of thing. And so what kind of leadership will be required to implement strategy? Is it today's leadership, or will there be some particular skills and knowledge bases required in the future? PepsiCo's most recent chief executive, who replaced Indra Nooyi, who was a wonderful chief executive, a lady from India, and she really put her stamp on the company. But when a new CEO was appointed, he had experience managing companies in Asia and Eastern Europe, a very international fellow, as was Mrs. Nooyi. But it's clear that the directors of PepsiCo decided that PepsiCo was going to have to be more successful in Asia and India and Eastern Europe, where countries were developing, and they put the guy who had that kind of knowledge in the driver's seat. So it's these are critical issues. And again, once you've done this project and you have all this knowledge that you've gathered, what my suggestion is to go get a 6-pack of beer and a pizza and sit around the table and talk about these things. Just talk about them and write down what you decide, because you with the exception of major projects and programs, maybe this is all just common sense and reasoning, isn't it? Especially when you get into what kind of leadership skills are required. You don't have to do the beer and pizza, but that's not a bad idea. And then, what will be the priorities for reviewing progress and replanning if necessary? Where are the critical junctures where things have to go right? And if they don't, something's going to have to be adjusted. So what are the critical turning points in this plan that you and your teammates have assembled? Well, that's a lot, isn't it? I will be with you. Now, there's one problem here, and that is that occasionally teams just don't want to meet with me. And if that's the case, I'm not going to force you. But I am going to judge the work that you do in each one of those last 4 weeks. So when your team prepares PowerPoint slides and work products, I want to see people's names on them. They can be down at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide, but I want to know who did that slide and who did the work on it, so that I can understand your contribution to your team's work product and progress. However, another alternative, well, you still have to do that. You still have to put the name on the product. But I would like to meet with you every week. And the best time to do that, pardon me, is before that week gets started, so that you're confident in the work that you do. So we've essentially got 4 days as I can see it, and that is Friday of the week before, because by that time you're pretty much done with that week's work. Saturday and Sunday, the weekend before that week begins, and Monday, before things really get going. Weekends are obviously the most attractive because I could actually meet with 2 teams and in the afternoon for one meeting and maybe the evening for the other. So talk among your teammates about when a good time to meet, to have a team meeting would be. And in that team meeting, we'll talk about the work that your team needs to do during that week to meet the requirements of this project. And in those meetings, I'll give you some coaching and I'll answer your questions. I'll do everything I can to help you and explain how to do the work. With few exceptions, I will not do the work for you, but I'll provide you with information to do the work with. So it's up to you the extent to which you want to use me, but I'm a resource for you in this project, and I'm more than willing to participate with you. This is an ambitious program, but when you're through with it, you're going to know a whole lot more than people who walk into that company that you're going to join for the first time just like you will. You'll know more than they do because you've been through this. That's the intent. That's the purpose. Okay, I think we've about concluded this briefing. I don't know how long it went, but I think it probably went pretty long. But I look forward to working with you and your teammates. And please give some thought to when you would like to meet with me, on which day of the week. And I think I sent you a bulletin asking you for 3 options because I may get your suggestion after I get somebody else, and their first preference might be the same as yours. But if I got theirs first, I will accept their first choice and then give you your second choice, and so forth. So please talk with your teammates, come up with those team meeting dates, and get in touch with me about them at your earliest convenience. Thanks. I'll see you soon at our first team meeting. Goodbye.